kinds of Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a...
All right, welcome to this week's episode of Breaking History on Badlands Media. My name's Matthew Arrett. I'm here with my friend Gordon, the ghost of based Patrick Henry, and we're here to on a rather somber moment here. 60 years ago, something big happened, which I think a lot of Americans, a lot of world citizens. I'm in Canada, and I've got stories from my parents who felt a lot of trauma over this thing that happened on November 22nd, 1963, the murder, of course, of President Kennedy. So today, it's a very historic moment, not that dissimilar in some ways from the sort of historic moment that John F. Kennedy himself was living through and intervening on willfully as a player on the stage of history. So I figured, Gordon, we've got a few things to say and a few thoughts about this that are particularly strategic. So how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm great, Matt. How are you?
I'm okay.
Yeah. I mean, very, very well said. Certainly somber day, especially with, this community, people who are seeking, truth and, in defiance of the Fed, the Fed narrative that's given to us, the Fed history that's given to us that is, handed to us by people that we really can't trust. And so last week we talked about the British East India Company. I think that this is going to tie into that maybe a little bit. We talked about going into the Palestine Exploration Fund. I think we'll save that for next week, as Matt reached out yesterday to me and suggested we talk JFK, because it didn't even dawn on me that today was the anniversary. So that was a great suggestion by Matt. And yes, I think there's going to be a really, really good, fruitful discussion that we had.
Yeah, people who are going to be watching our show will note that there will be a pattern, a telling of a story that will be tied to what came before, what will come afterwards. So while people will be able to sit down and I think get something out of this current conversation we're going to have today. Keep that in mind, that it will dovetail the ongoing conversation about the British East India Company to fight against a new world order of transhumanist, eugenics-loving anti-humanists who have tried and have been trying for many generations to reduce the world to a feudal state of human cattle under a world government. That's not a new thing. JFK was up against this as well. So are we, and that will tie into also the battles in the Middle East. And actually, that brings up two things. So I figured today I had a couple of little videos. Yeah, go ahead.
Before we start, should we hit the Goldco ad?
If you'd like to, yeah, that might be a good thing to start.
Yeah, with. Yeah. Let's go ahead and start that ad so we can knock that out, and then we'll hit some more at halftime.
All right, let's hear a word from Goldco.
All right, skyrocketing inflation, endless war, $31 trillion in debt, $4.7 trillion in new proposed taxes. This government just won't stop. Now they're hiring thousands of new gun-carrying IRS agents in all 50 states. I wonder what for. The truth is, things could get a whole lot worse if you're not protected. That's why we've partnered with the top-rated precious metals company, Goldco. Goldco has helped people like you and me place over $1 billion in gold and silver. For those with retirement accounts, they're offering Badlands supporters up to $10,000 in free silver when opening a qualified IRA account. For cash buyers, you're going to love this. You can get bonus silver just for making a purchase. If you buy $15,000 worth of precious metals, you'll get $750 in bonus silver. If you buy $25,000, you'll get $1,250 in bonus silver. This is your opportunity to protect yourself from our out-of-control, corrupt government. Go to badlandsgold.com to learn how you could get started today. That is badlandsgold.com.
Thank you, Gordon. All right. So let's, before honoring the memory of JFK and the coup d'etat, really, which is what it was, his murder wasn't just the murder of a great man. It was really a takeover, a coup d'etat of a certain incubating fifth column that had been embedded inside of the United States, inside of Washington, inside of Wall Street for many generations long before this. But before doing that, I figured let's, for the sake of a little bit of contrast, let's look at what an incompetent president is, just to appreciate what degree we've fallen. And I have a couple of little short clips of JFK. But first, let's hear a word from Biden. This is after he was 30 minutes late at the recent Apex. This is the Apex Summit. He was, again, 30 minutes late. World leaders are all there in San Francisco. A little bit of background music. Should have been there a while. Blinken's already sitting down. All right. And they're waiting. Something's going to change. Seagulls. The sound of seagulls all of a sudden impresses itself on the ears of the press and the world leaders. Where are these skulls coming from? They're in some sort of
Your
a stadium or
Excellencies, the President of the United States.
Okay, the Emperor has arrived. If there's any doubt who is the leader of the free world, that music should set you straight. With him jogging in.
Hello, everyone. We're going to extend.
Okay, I have to stop that.
That's laugh out loud funny. That's pretty embarrassing.
Yeah, that's just and the sound effects, everything, it's over the top.
Yeah, the
So
seagulls, like what's with that?
Yeah, I know, and the symphonic synthesizer music, just okay. So let's hear a word from JFK here. This is a message from his inaugural speech in 1961 January.
In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it. I do not believe that any of us would exchange places with any other people or any other generation. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man. Finally, whether you are citizens of America or citizens of the world, ask of us here the same high standards of strength and sacrifice which we ask of you. With a good conscience, our only sure reward, with history the final judge of our deeds, let us go forth to lead the land we love, asking his blessing and his help, but knowing that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own.
We haven't heard that type of language for a long time with somebody wielding real political power, and I thought that it was a good way to just start the tempo up for today's show.
Absolutely.
The thing that JFK I'm just so, on the one hand, moved by and frustrated by, on the other hand, is the fact that he was representing not an anomaly, as a lot of people say. Oh yeah, he was an outlier. He was like a one-off. Otherwise, it's just corruption. And it's like, no, if you think about it, he was the last of a sequence of American presidents to die while in office, forward by bullets, forward by poisoning. I'm quite convinced that Harrison, Zachary Taylor, and Warren Harding and Franklin Roosevelt were poisoned in varying ways, and there's a lot of evidence to show for that. So he's entering as part of a tradition of presidents who are standing up for something and against something very evil, which is a continuity, a thread all throughout America's revolutionary history from its earliest days to the present. And I think a lot of people, the oligarchy has done a number on us by getting us to think about each one of these cases as an individual case unto itself, outside the context and the flow of what they were. Is there a common denominator? Well, you can't know it if you're just looking myopically at each one of the cases and getting like obsessed over the local mini scandals and gossipy things that are amplified to become enshrined in our history books, like JFK. Oh yeah, he said nice things, but there's so much slander, right? Oh, but he killed Marilyn Monroe with his brother, don't you know? Oh, but he the mafia he wouldn't gotten in without the mafia, don't you know? And he was all about big business and capitalism. Or inversely, oh, he was a commie. Hoover was right. He was a communist infiltrator, don't you know? So there's all of this gossip that becomes almost like a force unto itself in people's minds that shut them down from realizing that he was carrying out a multidimensional. When I say multidimensional, I mean many aspects. I'm not talking quantum theory here. He was carrying out a fight on multiple levels at the same time, just as Lincoln was, just as Warren Harding was, just as Franklin Roosevelt was, or Harrison or Zachary Taylor or Garfield or McKinley. If you look at what he was doing, you can't just say, oh, it was one thing he was doing that stepped on some toes. He was doing things on a variety of levels, local, domestically, culturally, internationally. And I thought I have got two quotes I'd like to read just to set that into people's minds a little bit, especially considering what's going on in the Middle East right now and the insanity, the overbaked insanity, which is just blowing up. About a decade before this inaugural address, he was a congressman and he had toured the Middle East, North Africa, Algeria, Baghdad. He was all over the place, giving many speeches. He was very beloved. He was one of the first congressmen to really put into words the evils of imperialism for the people living in these places. So he already had early on a plan, and I think a lot of this came from his world experience fighting in World War II, nearly dying. It's a transformative identity that he went through. And so he always had a perspective that America was going to play a role in liberating the world from imperialism per se, and stopping America from becoming an empire, which is where it was sliding at that time. And he said, in having come home from this tour, he delivered a speech where he said that our intervention in behalf of England's oil investments in Iran, directed more at the preservation of interests outside Iran than Iran's own development, our failure to deal effectively after 3 years with the terrible human tragedy of the more than 700,000 Arab refugees, Palestinians. These are the things that have failed to sit well with Arab desires and make empty the promises of the voice of America. And I mean, you'd never hear a president today speaking about the Nakba, that's known as the catastrophe in Arabic, of the 700,000 who had their homes, their lands that they'd been living on for centuries taken from them by the Jabotinskyite settlement fanatics who believed then in a greater Israel that was ordained by God according to their reading of Kabbalistic scripture, that would be needed to be purged of those Arabs, those dirty subhumans living there, in order to establish a greater Israel shrine, making up not just all of Israel today, but all of Jordan, Syria, Turkey, a big chunk of Saudi Arabia, Egypt. All of that was what was behind the purging and the massacre of many of those Arabs that JFK was speaking very, very clearly to. He wrote a letter also to his father, who was a bit of a mixed bag unto himself, but I think he had a good side to him. And his father, in a speech, a young JFK, maybe 23 years old, 1938. So he was born in 1917. So what's that? That's 24 so years old. He was right after, that was the first time he had been to Palestine. And he wrote to his father describing his lessons and the nature of British intelligence and the British East India Company at playing such an evil role throughout the history of the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire, and making promises. British intelligence, he was making the point, we're making promises to the Arabs on the one hand, making promises to the Jews on the other hand, and always with the intention of backstabbing both and using both against each other. So he was very early on astute over this issue, and partially, I think, that had to do with the fact that on the one hand, he had enmeshed himself in a study of John Quincy Adams' American history. That was what his Profiles in Courage was about. It was him preparing himself to go onto the stage of history by immersing himself into the mindset of great men who had to think about where do you compromise in politics and how do you keep your moral principles without going, without losing yourself. And that involved the study of the British infiltration and manipulation of America from within. The other thing, because people tend to forget about his international fight, I wanted to just include this in during the presidential elections against Nixon, who was a major stooge for Averell Harriman and the whole Harriman banking clan. That was what he was up against at the time. I think Nixon ended up later on breaking from his mold and doing some useful things later on, but at this time it was not necessarily. JFK was up against something massive, but he makes the point on Africa. He says, call it nationalism, call it anti-colonialism. Africa is going through a revolution. Africans want a higher standard of living. 75% of the population now lives by subsistence agriculture. They want an opportunity to manage and benefit directly from the resources in, on, and under their land. The African people believe that the science, technology, and education available in the modern world can overcome their struggle for existence, that their poverty, squalor, ignorance, and disease can be conquered. The balance of power is shifting into the hands of the 2/3 of the world's population who want a share of what the 1/3 has already taken for granted. And right there you have him with President Kwame Nkrumah, who is the leader of the Pan-African movement of Ghana. That was the president of Ghana. He was later on ousted in a coup run by the CIA by Allen Dulles, who was playing a role still behind the scenes in 1967.
Shocker.
Yeah.
But that's the name, by the way, that's gonna be coming up, I think, a lot over the next hour.
I think so too.
Yeah.
And Dulles, well, there's two things here, because Kwame Nkrumah was the first head of state that JFK invited to the White House once he became elected. A lot of people don't know that either. Of all the people, right, all the big shot players he could have invited to the White House, he picks Kwame Nkrumah, the leader of the Pan-African movement, to be his first guest. They have a close bond. Kwame Nkrumah had organized also Patrice Lumumba, who JFK had planned to meet. That was on his itinerary. But Lumumba, 3 days before he was going to meet, was murdered by an operation run by the Belgian intelligence, British, and Allen Dulles directly through the Office of Policy Coordination, which was a new branch set up under the CIA to carry out covert operations. Originally, the CIA was supposed to be simply intelligence gathering, but then,
Correct.
of course, that ended very quickly. So Dulles and John Foster expanded the role of the CIA very quickly under Eisenhower to play more of a role, like JFK mentioned, to help overthrow people like Mossadegh, along with the British, the leader of Iran, who had nationalized British petroleum oil. And nationalized it, and for that he had a target put on his head and was overthrown with the help of the CIA under Eisenhower. I think Eisenhower probably felt some regret and tried to do his Atoms for Peace project to try to assist Iran to develop atomic energy for civilian use. But again, it was weak. He allowed a very dark thing to grow, and so it was nice that Eisenhower said what he said on the last day in office, saying, we have to look out for the military-industrial complex. But at the same time, I'm a little bit annoyed by Eisenhower for saying, for letting it happen.
I will quote our friend Warhamster, who has a great presentation that I'll throw in the chat, and I've learned a lot about the CIA from him. He's actually the one who turned me on to you a few years ago. But he said what Eisenhower should have said is the military-industrial intelligence complex. That would have been a probably more accurate descriptor.
Yes, it would have. Yeah. Warhamster is great. He does some great research. But yeah, and that's the thing. So this whole multidimensional thing growing through intelligence, which again, military, academia, it was infiltrating, taking control of academia. It was taking control of culture. Hollywood was being infested by this parasite on every level of the bureaucracy. So this is the deep state thing that JFK went to war with. This is what Kwame Nkrumah went to war with. What killed Patrice Lumumba in the Congo when Lumumba was about to do something very similar with the help of JFK and nationalizing a lot of the Belgian, French, and English oil and resources that had to be stopped. in Ethiopia as well, JFK was overseeing, had sent teams of American engineers to go and oversee what would it take to create a major dam. Today, it's finally been built, the Grand Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia, under Haile Selassie, the emperor of Ethiopia, who's another ally of the Pan-Africans. Nasser as well received support despite the CIA working against JFK. JFK wanted to give his full support to Nasser as well in his battle for a different type of pan-Arabic movement based upon economic development, cooperation, high-tech science, with the help of the USA to alleviate and end poverty and squalor. So even now, JFK, there's a plaque in Ghana at the dam at the Volta River. It's called the Akosombo Dam that he built with Kaiser. Edgar Kaiser was JFK's ally, who had built up the Hoover Dam, the Grand Coulee Dam, a lot of the hydroelectric power stations that transformed the Tennessee Valley Authority in the United States in the 30s from being a backwater, hillbilly den of ignorance with a very low life expectancy and very low productivity, to becoming an aerospace science cutting edge zone of production, where that was done through things like the Tennessee Valley Authority, which Edgar Kaiser, who was an enemy of J.P. Morgan, a real industrial capitalist, not one of these feudal industrial capitalists like J.P. Morgan, but somebody who saw the moral value in building things. He was an ally, and he built up a lot of this transformed America. And this is what Kwame Nkrumah was studying as a student in the 1930s and 40s in America, washing dishes on the one side and being sent down to the Tennessee Valley region to look at how did America do that so that we can figure out in Africa how to do the same type of thing and transform it the way the Americans did so successfully. So Paul Robeson, another thing to keep in mind, Paul Robeson during this time, who was an ally of Franklin Roosevelt and Henry Wallace, was a great baritone singer and actor, played Othello, but he was also an anti-imperialist, and he was the founder of the American Pan-African Committee, which recruited Kwame Nkrumah and helped train him in the subtleties of statecraft and understand the nature of the British Empire. So there's this whole relationship between the patriotic networks. And Paul Robeson, by the way, for those who don't know, was an African-American anti-imperial singer, and he was deconstructed during an MK Ultra operation right before he was going to take charge of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. He came back sort of a shell after 2 years of shock therapy and psychedelic trauma in London. That's a whole sick story unto itself. But you got this whole network that JFK is stepping into, working with, interfacing with. Edgar Kaiser is helping to build the Akosombo Dam in opposition to the sabotage of J.P. Morgan's United Steel, which is always trying to work against JFK and trying to force the price of steel to rise. And to this day, there's a plaque at the base of the Akosombo Dam in honor of the memory of John F. Kennedy. And it was only a week later that Nkrumah was overthrown. The dam still was built, but the idea of it being a driver for an industrial renaissance in all of Africa wasn't permitted, especially after by the time the late 60s rolled in. There was a complete, while there was political independence, there wasn't economic independence permitted. So JFK had this whole international fight, also with South American nations, to help do something very similar, and also internally, right? And there was a major fight against what Dulles represented inside of the United States, and for the positive development of building hydroelectric dams. Many of the dams being destroyed by the governor of California today over the last few years. Many of those dams were built up in two bursts. Burst number one was under Franklin Roosevelt, which created the Imperial Valley, transformed the desert into a food basket, right? One of the most productive vegetable growing regions in the world. On the other hand, was under John F. Kennedy, who oversaw a massive continental hydroelectric dam program that was extraordinary. And a lot of these dams now are being demolished with taxpayer money, with the idea that we have to liberate the deserts from the constraints of human technology, which destroyed the freedom of the desert to be a desert by building reservoirs and greening those deserts unnaturally. So now people are being destroyed, their access to cheap, affordable electricity.
And of course, these are probably the same people who are now telling us how the world is dying because of our existence, and we need to change. We need to have massive political revolutions for climate change and all that, but they're actually the ones who are damming up the rivers and creating these droughts, and like they're the ones who are changing the environment in the worst way. So that's actually interesting.
Absolutely. And this is actually going to play in. We're going to actually, let's say a word about this after a word from our sponsors. Let's say a word more about some of the eco-imperialists, let's call it that. The eco-imperialists that JFK was working to stop in his day, and how they played a role also in murdering him, which actually got a crazy scoop on that, and really running roughshod over his legacy. But yeah, let's maybe do a word from My Pillow.
Yeah.
You asked and we listened. We've taken your suggestions and we've made our already amazing Percale bed sheets even better. As a thank you, we're bringing these to you for as low as $24.98 with your promo code. And our new line of Percale bed sheets include everything you loved about our original sheets. Lightweight, durable, breathable, and they sleep cool and crisp. But now, because of you, they're made with 100% long staple cotton and the highest thread count to date. These sheets are softer and more durable than ever before. Plus, they come in all these new colors and styles. And you'll be getting 5-star luxury sheets delivered directly to your front door for as low as $24.98. Not only that, they come with our 10-year warranty and the 60-day money-back guarantee. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen now. Use your promo code to save 50% or more. That's as low as $24.98. This introductory offer won't last long, so please order now.
Awesome. Let's go ahead and do Benson as well while we're at halftime.
Yes, sir.
All right. Are you ready to embark on a journey to America's heartland through its natural mouthwatering sweetness? From a small town in Nebraska, Benson Honey Farms brings you just that and more. Indulge in the authentic, unpasteurized, 100% natural honey, a product of diligent bees working the fields of wildflowers. It's as raw and robust as the spirit of Badlands. Craving something sweet? Their honey-infused candies capture the essence of Nebraska. Each bite, a delightful taste of home. Benson Honey Farms, a celebration of the America First spirit, a symbol of the resilience of our homeland. Embodying the spirit of Badlands, their family-run operation is a reminder that the true flavor of America lies in its heartland. Benson Honey Farms, proudly American, naturally delicious. Visit badlandsmedia.tv/honey today and bring home the taste of the heartland.
Excellent. Thank you, Gordon.
Yeah. So let's pick up where you left off, but there are a few things I want to mention just because you hit some really great points there. U.S. Steel. So William Nelson Cromwell invented the concept of the holding company, which is U.S. Steel was a holding company. They went around and basically bought up all these smaller steel factories and shops around the country and consolidated it into a giant corporation. Cromwell, of course, partnered up with Sullivan and created Sullivan and Cromwell, which is the law firm that was really deeply connected to the CIA and the Dulles brothers. The Dulles brothers, of course, were at the Treaty of Versailles in Paris in 1919. They are a big reason that Germany got carved up the way it did and ultimately led to conditions that created for World War II. And actually really became invested in Germany as fascists because a bunch of those guys were fascists. And then you mentioned also the CIA when it was created, they were there's a big fight over whether they were going to be purely an intelligence gathering agency or also participate in covert operations. A big part of that was, my understanding, is Operation Gladio, which was organized by British intelligence. That was the stay behind operation in Europe after World War II, the cleanup effort. And basically these guys were there to operate to remove or destroy left-wing politicians emerging in Western Europe who had sympathies for communism. And it was the Royal Engineers, actually, who we talked about last week with the East India Company, who trained them up on how to use explosives to kill people, to kill politicians, that sort of thing. And so, yeah, the Royal Engineers were actually training up CIA guys, or guys who would go on to become part of the CIA kill teams, the Phoenix program, that sort of thing, which all leads into the Warren Commission with JFK assassination. But please continue.
Wow. No, that's your contribution is so high value. That's great. And I think as well, yeah, you can't the role of Wilson Nelson Cromwell is vital. The idea of the holding company as an innovation to mask imperial feudalism around a capitalist veneer has been a trick that a lot of people have bought into for a long time. And if you take away the holding company principle, the whole empire that is currently trying to dominate the world collapses.
Yep.
And you can see some
And
stories.
for those who don't, sorry to interrupt, but for those who
Yeah,
don't know
yeah,
what a
yeah.
holding company is, it is a company that creates nothing, produces nothing, offers no service. It's just an umbrella organization for other companies.
Yeah, it's like a
A,
globalizer. You can
a
call it globalization. Uh,
parent company is how they're described today. So like a parent company, you probably heard that
yeah,
term.
yeah, exactly. Or shell companies also play into this a little bit as well.
Hmm.
Where it's a nice cover for money laundering, for buying up and destroying competition, small medium enterprises, and then moving a control mechanism over production and distribution of goods from the actual small and medium businesses that make up the lifeblood of any type of civilization to a tightly controlled, centralized network of cultists who are part of an initiated inner club, like the Bilderberger Group. So as far as
Hmm.
like, we were talking about the British East India Company last week, the Dutch East India Company, also big one, both created around the same time with similar principles as a global corporation, very, very enmeshed with government, nominally doing things for money, but not really, because at the end of the day, it was all about global systems management, global systems of control, and destroying the productive powers of rival nations in India or China or anyone, the colonies, from being able to stand on their own 2 feet economically. And these had nominally rivalries throughout the 17th century, but we saw the Anglo-Dutch system merge with the Bank of England taking on itself as a model, the Bank of Amsterdam, first world's private central bank that was set up in 1609. That was
Hmm.
adopted by England in 1694 after the Dutch, the Glorious Revolution, the installation of the Dutch King William of Orange, with the installation also of the Orange Order into England, overseen by certain Venetian operatives who are always there around Marlborough, Churchill, facilitating the entry. The Dutch Stock Exchange, the Bourse, was then replicated and applied also in England, so that you had these private central banks interfacing with an international private cartel of the British, the Dutch, East India companies. The Royal Africa Company was a big part of what John Locke was a controller of as well. Made a lot of money off the slave trade. And this is where people wonder, oh, America was built on slavery. Look at the 1619 Project. And it's like, well, yeah, there were slaves brought into America, but it wasn't really America. It was a British colony, and the slaves were brought in at that time by the British Royal Company. That's why John Locke wrote his Constitution of South Carolina when he was the director of the British Royal Company, over to defend the idea that rights come from your right to own property. In his mind, property included human beings. And that's where the infusion and the growth of the economic dependency upon slavery came from. So today, you got the Bilderberger Group, overseen by Prince Bernhard, leading high-level Nazi officer. Prince Philip, who works closely with Bernhard, right, overseeing things like the Royal Dutch Shell Company. I mean, the Royal Dutch, that's an Anglo-Dutch operation, which is the direct outgrowth of the Dutch British dance of the 18th, 19th centuries,
Hmm.
and things like the World Wildlife Fund for Nature. So this
Yeah.
is the two of the 3 guys who founded the World Wildlife Fund for Nature were Prince Philip and Prince Bernhard. Prince Bernhard only 7 years after he founded the Bilderberger Group as the inner club, right, to coordinate globalist operations internationally with your inner initiates brought in, much higher level than the Davos Group. The Davos Group, it's a forum where you may or may not be on the inside club. That's 2,000 plus people coming by every year, some signing business deals. A few, maybe a fraction, actually are part of the inside parties, but most are just there to do deals.
Yeah.
Bilderberger Group, if you're in that, good chances you've probably sold your soul. And so
Yeah.
you got these initiating things that then set into motion the Morgue's Manifesto in 1961, which calls for, it was authored by Julian Huxley, the founder of transhumanism, the founder of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and the head of UNESCO, United Nations Education, Science, and Cultural Organization. All this was done in 1960, 46 to 48, when he founds all of these things. The Morgue's Manifesto that he writes for Prince Bernhard and Prince Philip, because those are the three guys who found the World Wildlife Fund for Nature at that same year. It's a manifesto for the New World Order. The idea of the Morgue's Manifesto is how to break humanity from the fallacious ethics and morality of Judeo-Christian values that presumed foolishly that human life was sacred, that we were made in the image of God, that industrial growth is a good thing because we alleviate poverty when we're industrializing. But no, he said the new ethics must be not to protect human beings from empire like we've formerly been thinking, but actually to protect nature from human beings. And that sleight of hand is what was used to then craft and organize the entire monstrous growth of the World Wildlife Fund for Nature, the 1001 Nature Trust, which had Maurice Strong. I mean, it was created by both Prince Philip and Prince Bernhard. This thing had 1001 members who all kicked in $10,000 to fund the World Wildlife Fund, which itself was created to fund the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which was behind this whole reorganization of morality from being good to being transhumanist, which is why Julian Huxley created transhumanism, as well as worshiping nature, as if nature was more sacred than humans. We were the pox, the virus, and nature was the pure thing if we just left it alone. But that would mean, well, there's billions of us. Well, what do we do? How do we bring the cancer cells back into harmony, which is, with the purity of Mother Gaia? So it's a rehashing of the old Mother Gaia cults that animated and controlled much of the ancient world of Anatolia, Rome, in different parts of the world. That was called the cult of Cybele, the Magna Mater, the master alpha mother earth goddess cults that took on the form of Gaia in Rome. All the same thing, though, and that's really what they've just rehashed. This is what what Francis of Assisi was doing too when they set up the Franciscan order that became the Jesuits. Francis what was he doing? He was giving his sermons to humans, but also to squirrels and trees, with the logic saying, because people were like, Francis, what are you doing? Why are you giving sermons to squirrels? It's like, well, because they're all made in God's image, just like us. So he brought everything onto the same playing field. Yeah. And so it shouldn't be a surprise that he was working with the founder of the Inquisition that was first adopted by Venice before being sent into Spain under the Habsburgs as part of the clampdown of converting Christianity into a fascist tool. And he was also working in Jerusalem, preaching to the Crusaders to give them strength to continue their jihad to take the Holy Land. That was part of the whole, pervert the destruction of the types of cooperative policies that were going on between the Christians of the Carolingian dynasty, the Chinese of the Tang dynasty, the Abbasid dynasty of Harun al-Rashid, the Khazars, the Jewish dynasty in the north, actually played a very positive role in that economic cooperation process of the 8th and 9th centuries. And this is what's been turned inside out in our current day, and what the Crusades were deployed to destroy, with the Franciscan order playing a big role in creating this new pseudo-mercenary class, with many not knowing what it was about, thinking that they're into the monastic life, just living, but you have a rite of initiation whereby at a higher ordering, just like you have in the Jesuits or the Templars, which is all sort of a continuation of the same thing, because the Franciscans had as their symbol the cross with 4 little crosses, just like the Templars, just like the Kingdom of Jerusalem, right? Which is the Templar kingdom for 200 years during the Crusades that was taken after the First Crusade. So it's the same thing that was trying to reduce human beings down to the status of other animals. Everything is sacred as long as it doesn't change and just doesn't use too much thinking, because thinking causes problem solving, causes technology, causes change of nature and ourselves. That's bad. It's unnatural. It's evil, because and that's what was rewired every step of the way, that JFK was trying to help people understand that no, it's by changing in a lawful way that we become in harmony with God's law and the will of the Creator.
Interesting. That's all fascinating. And you mentioned a few things that I want to draw some through lines here. So you mentioned the
Sure.
English and the Dutch, the Dutch connection. So the Dulles brothers, who again are instrumental in the creation of the CIA in 1947 under Truman. As I said, they were young men at the Treaty of Versailles. They helped carve up Germany. They worked for the law firm Sullivan and Cromwell. Sullivan and Cromwell used a bank called Brown Brothers Harriman, which is a private elite bank. And they used that bank to funnel money to the Nazi party through Amsterdam in the 1920s. And their agent working on the ground there was a guy named Prescott Bush, who, of course, is the father of the President Bush and the grandfather of the more recent President Bush. Yeah. And then, of course, Dulles is involved. Dulles, of course, is the CIA director when the Bay of Pigs fiasco happens, which evidently seemed to be some sort of it was designed to fail so that Kennedy would maybe send in the military. He didn't take the bait. He fires Dulles. Dulles continues to run the CIA secretly from a shadow presidency, shadow director. And then, of course, he's on the Warren Commission. Allen Dulles is running the Warren Commission, who then puts out the false narrative of how JFK was assassinated. So just drawing that through line there for everybody so they understand that.
Beautiful. No, that's very important to keep that whole thing in mind, because it's Dulles wasn't just like some psychopath who was pissed at JFK. Dulles thought that he could control JFK too, right? He was actually a family friend of Joe Kennedy. He knew JFK since he was a kid, and he thought, okay, he's one of us. We can handle him. He might have some romantic ideas and stuff, but he'll become a realist soon. I can manage him. So yeah, Dulles learned very quickly that JFK was actually a man of substance very, very, very early on. And the fact that, yeah, as you pointed out, Brown Brothers Harriman, that was actually the family, that was a merger, right? The Brown Bank of England was the family bank of Montague Norman, who was the head of the Bank of England for 20 years, that oversaw the creation of the Bank of International Settlements, that oversaw the growth, that worked very closely with Hjalmar Schacht, the Nazi finance minister. That was very important connection. And the fact that George Bush and the Bush family, Prescott Bush, was behind the funding of Hitler, right? When Hitler was thinking about committing suicide because he lost politically in 1932, he was bailed out with a huge loan from Brown Brothers Harriman, which basically revitalized him and gave him the oomph he needed to bring his Nazi party into a position where they could do their own Reichstag fire and their own inside job that put into play something that we know very well as World War II, which really was supposed to be a war whereby Hitler and Mussolini and other fascists like Franco and Salazar of Portugal and other fascists were going to be, along with their fascist collaborators in America around Prescott Bush, J.P. Morgan, Henry Luce of Time magazine. You had a whole nest that was trying to kill Franklin Roosevelt with the bankers' putsch. That effort using Smedley Butler to kill Roosevelt and install a fascist dictator in the White House.
That's what that was all
about. The
1934.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is exactly what Smedley Butler pointed out. There's this whole J.P. Morgan monstrosity that was waiting in the wings to do this, and he blew the whistle. Thank God he did. That bought some time for American patriots to rally around the defense of the nation and thwart what would have been an Anglo-American banking operation, which these fascists, Time magazine had Mussolini as the man of the year 8 times in a row. There was a whole plan to turn America hard fascist fast.
Hitler in 1938. I think Hitler was on the cover like six or seven times. Man of the year 1938. So yes, and Time magazine was founded by I was in my notes. Founded by a guy by the name of bear with me, Henry Lutz. Henry Lutz. Founded, and that's Time magazine, Life magazine, Fortune 500, and Sports Illustrated. It's like one of the most influential magazine empires out there. And all these guys are connected, by the way, because they're all in the Skull and Bones at Yale. A lot of these guys. Yeah. So talk about secret societies. That's one of the big ones.
Yeah, it's huge. And so it's fascinating because JFK, you'd think that would demoralize you, knowing that you have this very powerful entity. But on the one hand, Franklin Roosevelt was able to subvert that New World Order agenda when he did with his allies in Russia and in China. Russia took on 25 million lives that died in Russia. China lost upwards of 14 million of their people fighting the Japanese fascists who were being funded by Jacob Schiff. the same Warburg operation that had created the Federal Reserve, were funding the Japanese fascist machinery that had its own promised jurisdiction of a regional empire in Asia. You had Haj Amin, the Muslim Brotherhood collaborator, who was installed by the British as the over British Mandate Palestine, who was working closely with the Nazis, and his job was to turn the Arab world into a pro-Nazi machinery under the Muslim Brotherhood that would then take control of a certain jurisdiction of the Arab world under obedience to a higher command structure of bankers, just like Hitler would take control of the slave colony of Russia and the inland. England was told, okay, you're going to take control of India, a big chunk of Africa and beyond, and the American fascists would take control of most of North America and Central America. So you had this whole divvying up of the world under a eugenics-based world government, which is where the Harriman family were one of the major patrons of the pseudoscience of eugenics.
Another skull and bones guy.
Another skull and bones guy.
Mm-hmm.
And all of this was based on an idea that at the end of the day, certain families are born to rule, others to be enslaved. And this, again, what JFK was fighting against was all of this stuff. He gave a speech where he very much was clear that he was taking up the torch of Franklin Roosevelt, who died while in office, and Stalin presumed that he was murdered by Churchill's people by poisoning. Likely was the case. There was never an autopsy. So that's an important one. And for a lot of the people who say, oh, but Roosevelt just wanted to make money in World War II, it's sort of like the same thing where people say, oh, JFK just wanted to destroy Cuba as an imperialist. Look at the Bay of Pigs. And they don't see that, no, there's this entire deep state working against the presidents who are doing certain things. And many of those trying to keep America out were the Henry Luce Time magazine fascists who wanted America out because they wanted Hitler to win, because they had a promise to have a one world government co-managed with the Nazis. That was the plan. So the idea, yeah.
Or the fact that like William Harvey, who was a part of a CIA kill team, he was involved in the Bay of Pigs, and he actually confessed to Bobby Kennedy after the fact that he had recruited members of the mafia, the Italian mafia, to be part of the CIA, which infuriated Bobby Kennedy and basically like sent him on a warpath against the mafia, which all led to their own doing of JFK and his brother. And RFK has talked about this a little bit in some of his some of his interviews. But yeah, William Harvey, really, really bad guy, involved in the Bay of Pigs, and the Bay of Pigs also had a guy by the name of Theodore Shackley. If you're familiar with him, Theodore Shackley is a former SS officer. Because I saw someone in the chat say the CIA operates
OSS.
Oh yeah, but before that, he was a member of the Nazi Germany. He was in the SS. He worked under Reinhard Gehlen, who was an SS officer, and then Shackley actually became part of. Gehlen was an SS officer, recruits Shackley, and he becomes the first class of the CIA. And he is appointed CIA station chief in Miami in 1961, which is the biggest station outside of Langley, and is there during both the Bay of Pigs and the assassination of JFK.
Right. That's important. Yeah. And the other two guys to keep in mind as well is Charles Cabell and Richard Bissell, who JFK fired the same day that he fired Allen Dulles. And you had Charles Cabell, his brother was the mayor of Dallas, Texas. Charles Cabell was the deputy director of the CIA, who was also fired for his role in that. Richard Bissell was the founder of Area 51, carrying out all sorts of experimental, stuff on material that was taken from Nazi aerospace engineers working on flying saucer tech and drones and stuff. So that whole thing was part of that operation. But all that to say, Bissell was also in charge of the Special Operations Branch of the Office of Policy Coordination, which oversaw the hit squads that were used to carry out the murder or the overthrow of the president of the Dominican Republic in 1954, the Guatemalan coup as well in 1955 or 1954. That was Richard Bissell, and he was assigned also to kill Castro. There was something like 58 different attempts during the small period to kill Castro. Why? Because I think, Castro has big problems, but at the same time, he also shut down United Fruit, the agency that was used by the imperialists as sort of a holding company in a sense to take control of all of Latin America. He kicked them out. He actually shut down their operations. He shut down Mayor Lansky, and he kicked out the mafia, which was working with the CIA. He kicked them out, never permitted to return again. And so, Cuba has been suffering under 60 plus years of sanctions to try to cripple them, to bring them back under the fold. And he went through a lot. He avoided a lot of assassination attempts. It was crazy, despite the fact that I know Castro was a Jesuit trained. He's got all sorts of problems. I'm not saying he's a good guy, but there's nuance in life. And so
what's
JFK
important to know,
was very, very angry with these guys.
Yeah, well, it's important to understand that there's different factions fighting for each other. I think people want to reduce it down to one group controlling the world, and that's just not the case. It's definitely a Game of Thrones for sure. It's just right now they're all their interests are aligned against the populist revolution. That's what we're facing right now. But you mentioned the Vatican earlier. The mafia was actually used in Operation Underground. They teamed up with the CIA, and they used the mafia in Sicily to process the opium from Asia, and that the money for that was laundered by the Vatican Bank. So it's like you have the Vatican working with the CIA, working with the mafia, working with the Nazis, and that same guy Shackley I just mentioned, Theodore Shackley, he becomes CIA director in 1973. This is 10 years after JFK is assassinated. This guy this is according to War Hamster, who's very, very reliable. He says Joseph Burkholder Smith was the CIA deputy chief in Mexico in 1973. Shackley comes in as director. He wants to identify who the loyal people are, who the deputy chiefs are that he can trust. So he has them all interview with people to vet them. He has Burkholder fly down to Argentina, and Burkholder basically got spooked by all this, so he comes public with it later. But Burkholder flies down to Argentina to interview for the job that he already has, basically to interview to keep his job. And he is blown away by his own admission that basically he feels like he's in Bavaria, Germany. There's swastikas everywhere. There's Germans everywhere. And he's interviewed by a bunch of former Nazis about whether he should stay in the CIA. And they explain to him, we're going to be we are going to be doing cocaine operations, drug operations, and you're going to be a part of that, trafficking the drugs up through Mexico into the United States. And he basically said, I don't want any part of that. And so he came clean about that later. And that led to, of course, Iran-Contra and and the Miami drug wars. And we all know that story about Pablo Escobar. So all of this stuff, and that also ties into the fact that CIA is not really a reliant on congressional funding. They're an entrepreneurial group, just like the East India Company was. And one last quick little anecdote is I don't know if you're familiar with Operation Golden Lily. That's a fascinating little story that War Hamster brought up, where basically the Japanese during World War II or before World War II, as they conquered Asia, they acquired all this gold from the nations they conquered, and they amassed it together. Towards the end of the war, as the island hopping campaign is winning and MacArthur is moving across Asia, this general Yamashita, I believe is his name, Yamashita panics because he has all this gold. So they're trying to get the gold back to Japan, but they can't do it fast enough. So Yamashita starts digging these enormous pits, 100 feet deep, and burying all the gold throughout the Philippines. MacArthur discovers the gold eventually, and immediately calls Truman and says, what do I do with this? This is an enormous sum. And Truman says, come back to Washington immediately. He gets on a plane, flies to Washington, and Truman calls in 3 guys who are all connected to this. They're all connected to this and connected to the JFK stuff. But basically it was $1.5 trillion in gold is what the estimated amount was. And that's a big reason why the CIA doesn't really need us. They don't need us. They don't need tax dollars and any of that stuff. They have their own little golden
treasure trove.
Exactly. Yeah. So
interesting point. Let's do this. We got time for one more commercial and maybe a final parting thought from JFK. So let's do that.
Yeah.
All right. So we got 1791 gun leather.
Yes. Hey there, Badlanders. Are you in the market for a top-notch holster? For more than 2 centuries, the Second Amendment has protected our rights to keep and bear arms. At 1791 Gun Leather, our love for the Second Amendment goes hand in hand with our passion for the art of gun leather. 1791 Gun Leather holsters mold to just about any handgun, whether you prefer IWB or OWB carriers. IWB or OWB carry, or if you're looking for the perfect everyday carry solution. They only use 100% certified American heavy native steer hide, and their team incorporates 4 generations of professional leather artisans into the mastery of both beautiful craftsmanship and functionality found in each holster. Each 1791 gun leather product is a testament to their unwavering commitment to excellence. Protect your freedom, protect your firearm, protect your loved ones, and do it all with a 1791 gun leather gun holder. Plus, every holster comes with a lifetime warranty. Your satisfaction and peace of mind are top priority. Visit badlandsmedia.tv/1791 and use promo code Badlands for 10% off. That's badlandsmedia.tv/1791, promo code Badlands for 10% off.
If I wasn't a Canadian and I was allowed to own a gun, I would get one of those.
Well played.
Look, I think that we've been through a lot here, and we could go on, I think, for another 2-3 hours, actually. I know there's so much I'm sure we have inside of us. It's painful to stop so soon. But I want to make a point here. JFK had a plan, a program put in motion with the National Security Memorandum to shut down U.S. support for the Vietnam War and started a retraction of U.S. advisors. That was put into motion just a month, I think, before he was murdered. He had a program to end the Cold War as well that people don't know. To bring about a basis of cooperation with the Soviet Union around science, technology, space exploration that would ended the age of mutual assured destruction. That was part of the program of controls that the empire had put into motion. Right, everybody put their knives at everybody else's throats, so that no way you can get cooperation. And I think that this is introducing a way of thinking, which is, if we're going to survive the coming storm, it's going to be because of a revival of this way of thinking that JFK exemplified in his United Nations speech in September 23rd, 1963, which is such an important speech. So I just want to end this here with this call for a U.S.-Russia cooperative policy on discovering new principles of the universe and translating that to new technologies to end hunger and starvation and the strife that was being caused by the empire. So let's just end with JFK.
In the long history of the world,
The United Nations 18th General Assembly, which opened in an unusually hopeful atmosphere, here's a message of interplanetary importance from President Kennedy, who arrives with Ambassador Adlai Stevenson. Mr. Kennedy is welcomed by Secretary General Outhant and American delegate Dr. Ralph Bunche. He is the first of many chiefs of state who are scheduled to address the Assembly. The probable next is Marshal Tito of Yugoslavia. Mr. Kennedy hails the pause in the Cold War while taking note of Cuba and Berlin. Then he makes a startling proposal.
Finally, in a field where the United States and the Soviet Union have a special capacity, in the field of space, there is room for new cooperation, for further joint efforts in the regulation and exploration of space. I include among these possibilities a joint expedition to the moon. Space offers no problems of sovereignty. By resolution of this assembly, the members of the United Nations have forsworn any claim to territorial rights in outer space or on celestial bodies, and declared that international law and the United Nations Charter will apply. Why, therefore, should man's first flight to the moon be a matter of national competition? Why should the United States and the Soviet Union, in preparing for such expeditions, become involved in immense duplications of research, construction, and expenditure?
Yeah, so I thought that was a good way to just end it on the question of what creative statecraft actually looks like, breaking out of closed systems that the empire has been trying to keep us locked into, fighting over diminishing returns in a world of scarcity, and instead thinking about an open system, which all evidence shows us that the universe, and we are a reflection of God's creation of the entirety of the universe, is an open system that is constantly in a state of life, creativity, growth, so that when our policies are in harmony with that law, it is because we are facilitating new creative discoveries as we reach out into the unknown with the faith that we will make discoveries and problem solve, instead of running away from the unknown into the controlled domains of what's already monopolized in terms of knowledge, in terms of resources, as the world gets smaller and we fight over scarcity, which is how the empire likes to control their slaves. So JFK, guy, he's just working on every single level you can imagine.
Very well said. And I think that connects to the news that was announced last night with the 4-day ceasefire in Israel. And then you have simultaneously, you have, I call them Team Peace, but it's the Saudi-led coalition that came out of the Islamic Summit from 2 weeks ago, are traveling around the world right now, gathering international support to leverage their collective power, collective clout against Israel to just bring about peace and end in the fighting so we can get back to the negotiating table and get that peace deal done. China, Russia, those are the first 2 stops they've been to, and now they are in London today to get Britain on board. So talk about breaking out of the closed system and going to the open system. That's creative thinking.
God bless. All right, guys. So thank you, everyone, for watching us, and tune in next week for another episode of Breaking History, where we will continue this flow of thought